Coming up on this week's show,
I'll be asking if our holiday habits will change post-pandemic.
Now you're finding that the response is safety, health, wellness.
Pirouettes, prima donnas and more. Our rundown of online events to keep you going till we can all travel again. Plus, we visit the animal hospital working round the clock to save New Zealand's endangered penguins.
They're quite aggressive. They want to bite you, they want to flip or bash you, they poop all over you, but we love them.
hello and welcome to the Travel Show, coming to you from London's Covent Garden here in the UK. Now, I am on the famous piazza, which is normally heaving with tourists. Some 40 million people pass through this patch every year, but with the travel restrictions still in place, it's a very different story today. Now, as usual, we've got stories from around the globe to entertain and inspire you. But over the coming weeks, we'll also be looking at some of the big issues affecting travel as the world starts opening up again.
We'll be asking some big questions about the part that technology could play in shaping our future travels, and also looking at how the business of travel currently works and why it left so many of us waiting for months for our refunds last year.
But let's kick off with something a lot of us have been thinking about whilst we've been stuck at home: how to make our travels more sustainable.
People have realised that too much of a good thing can be bad.
Tourism creates this invisible burden.
You can't take that natural beauty for granted.
Now, we all know whenever we travel, there's an exchange going on. We can go huge distances relatively quickly just for the fun of it. And when we get there, we can just chill out on the beach if we like. But the exchange part is that we spend money, and in turn, that helps local economies, and maybe we offset some of the pollution we cause. Plus, travel helps us to gain a better understanding of cultures around the world. But for an increasing number of destinations, and for the people who live there, that exchange, it just doesn't seem to work anymore. Coronavirus impact on travel has been like nothing we have ever seen before, and it has hit tourist-dependent places particularly hard. What's not known yet, though, is whether things will bounce back to how they were, or whether when people start travelling again, they'll do it differently.
COVID, in connecting us back with nature, with communities, with ourselves, with the value of holidays, I think we'll see a greater demand for sustainable tourism.
Up until 2020, the trend towards increasing tourism had been remarkable. It was kind of like this, with that top figure being a record 1.4 billion tourist arrivals in 2018. Put into perspective, that's like every woman, man and child in China going away on holiday, or 2 Europes, with the expectation that it could hit 1.8 billion by 2030. But more tourists has meant a lot more pressure on a huge range of things that communities depend on. Globally, tourism accounted for 1/10 of all the money made around the world. But it's safe to say that catering for our thirst to see the world is big business. And that's where it gets complicated. Now, this isn't going to all be bad news, far from it. But let's take a second to look at where things stand at the moment. Before the pandemic, some destinations were being swamped, from European cities to global heritage sites to wilderness areas and national parks. Tourist visits to Barcelona, for example, had quadrupled in a decade, up to a point where the number of visitors in a year was 20 times the city's population. Cheap flights, home share websites, cruise ships, more disposable income are just a few of the things contributing to the problem.
Governments have targeted their destinations with a number of visitors, because a number of visitors is easy to count. So it's every year, in order for them to get their marketing budgets for their tourist boards, they'll say you need X number of visitors.
Local communities are feeling pushed out and are not seeing the benefits.
For tourism to be sustainable, we don't just think about environmental sustainability. Economic and social sustainability is absolutely as important in making sure that tourism works for everybody. If you can think about where you spend your money, you can directly contribute.
And then there's the environment. Our travels come at a cost, from the waste we produce to the water we consume to the energy we use. The World Tourism Organization says that 3/4 of all tourism emissions are transport related. Add to that the fact that record numbers of people are traveling, and that amounts to 5% of all man-made emissions.
There's, the least developed countries in this world, for example, the 50 least developed countries, tourism is probably in their top 3, if they're not their top number 1 industry. That's how they survive. If we take away aviation from that fact, those guys are not going to be able to live, basically. There's going to be a death of a lot of communities. And so tourism's really, really important for their sustainability, and that involves flying. So none of this is simple.
What's really sustainable for many of the countries in the Caribbean is that tourism also provides a wonderful avenue for entrepreneurship. It's a great way for women and young people to have their own business in tourism.
So who can take responsibility today and in the future? You could say it really comes down to these 3: authorities, businesses, and us, the individual travellers. At destinations around the world, taxpayers' money is spent on attracting visitors, and the focus has been on quantity.
What we need to understand is whether tourism is delivering a net positive benefit to communities. And ultimately, communities are the ones that need to be asking themselves, is tourism delivering what we hope for and expect from this particular economic driver? Because otherwise, tourism is in and of itself yet another extractive industry.
Some local authorities from Venice to Dubrovnik have begun putting greater restrictions on cruise ships, and some are letting locals decide on the future of how tourism impacts their locations. At Key West, Florida, residents have decided enough is enough.
We've had cruise ships in Key West for about 30 years. In the last 15 years, the size of ships has really ramped up significantly. Ships that are so big, they're stirring up massive amounts of mud and sediment and silt. Half of all tourists that come to Key West come by cruise ships, but only 8% of all tourist spending comes from cruise ships. Up to 10,000 people a day in a town of only 25,000 people.
The residents were given a public vote to decide on whether to restrict large cruise ships and limit cruise passengers' arrival once cruising returns.
I think what we saw, during the pandemic is what Key West could be like without these large cruise ships. We started to remember that what's so valuable about this place and that we have to protect the environment here. So we, a referendum was put on the ballot and it passed, overwhelmingly. We're committed to being a tourist town. That's what we are, but it's got to be a balance.
For destinations and tourists, COVID-19 has made them look at things differently.
I think a year ago, if you had said to visitors choosing some destinations, what's at the top of your list? The response may well have been the beach. Now you're finding that the response is safety, health, wellness, experiences, the beach.
From the businesses, there are some solutions on the horizon.
Around the world, many are signing up to declare a climate emergency. Huge leaps are being made with new inventions. Things like fuel based on food waste. Airbus is close to having a concept flight powered by hydrogen. And so what can we do as travellers? Well, we can travel to fewer and different places for longer and, where possible, fly less. We can limit our impact on local resources
We can engage with local cultures, and we can choose to spend our money on things which directly benefit local people. Carbon offsetting can help.
The future of tourism will be what we make it. And the same kinds of things that we might do in our own economy, in our own place, if we do them abroad, we're being responsible travellers, and we can change tourism and make it better by the way we travel.
Still to come on the show.
Good girl. Yeah, you're going to Penguin Place.
We're in New Zealand with the vets battling to save some of the world's rarest penguins.
So don't go away.
Welcome back to a very rainy Covent Garden, home to the world's famous Royal Opera House. Now, these doors have been closed to visitors for some time now, but let's take a look ahead at how they and other attractions will be keeping us entertained as the world slowly opens up again.
Live shows are returning to the Royal Opera House. Audiences can go in person again from mid-May if restrictions continue to lift. Its new programme will be published on Tuesday. In the meantime, the live streams it's been posting since the beginning of lockdown will continue until further notice under the hashtag #OurHouseToYourHouse. A year later than planned, the Olympic torch relays begun in Japan ahead of this summer's Olympic and Paralympic Games, and you can follow it on the official website. It started on March 25th in part of Fukushima that was badly affected by the earthquake and tsunami in 2011. Highlights of the relay route will be the subtropical island of Okinawa in early May, the former imperial capital Kyoto at the end of May, and Mount Fuji in mid-June. 2 years ago this month, the world watched as Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral burned. To mark the disaster, the Museum of Paris website has created an exhibition called Notre Dame de Paris in more than 100 works. It's a fascinating potted history told through drawings, prints, photos and video of the landmark. And while you've got Paris on your mind, the Louvre has put its entire collection online for free for the very first time. The Mona Lisa and Venus de Milo are among the nearly 500,000 exhibits you can get a closer look at. And it's only a few weeks until the Academy Awards in Hollywood. The new Academy Museum is scheduled to open in LA this September. We went to see it being built back in 2019.
In 1929, when Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford were just starting the Academy, they said, it's already time for us to start thinking about a film museum. And here we are, 90 years later. It took a while, but we're at the top looking over the Hollywood that they saw.
In the meantime, some of the highlights of the collection have been published online. There's loads more to come later this month too, to coincide with the awards ceremony on the 26th, including exclusive talks with some of the biggest names in filmmaking.
Hopefully some of those ideas will keep you going whilst we wait for those travel restrictions to be lifted. Okay, next up, we're off to New Zealand and a unique animal hospital. We travelled to Dunedin in the South Island to meet a team who've been fighting throughout the pandemic to save injured wildlife and the country's rare endangered penguins.
With a harbour stretching 20 kilometres, New Zealand's Otago Peninsula is home to some unusual locals, such as the yellow-eyed penguin, the rarest penguin species in the world, with only 5,000 remaining in the wild. It's why Dr. Lisa and her team at the Dunedin Wildlife Hospital have been caring for injured and sick penguins throughout the pandemic.
No, this is not how this works. This is not how this works.
But due to the restrictions on travel into the country, the future of these efforts is in doubt.
We've only been running for just over 3 years now, so we exclusively care for native New Zealand wildlife. So So one of the patients that we see the most are hoi-hoi or yellow-eyed penguins. That's actually the inspiration for opening this hospital. Don't bite anyone. They are an endangered species here in New Zealand and have been in quite serious decline quite rapidly for the past, I'd say, 10, 12 years now. No, don't try to go up. All that. Good. Come here, toddler. I've been working with these birds for about 13 years, so I have about 13 years of scars accumulating on my arm. No, no, no. Don't bite me either. No. People think penguins are all cute. They're not. All these big wounds have healed. They're quite vicious, they're quite aggressive. They want to bite you, they want to flip or bash you, they poop all over you, but we love them.
Oh no, she's gonna run this way.
She is. No, go that way. Yay, 4 down. We got a penguin from Boulder Beach, which is one of the most extensively monitored breeding populations. A beautiful female, very important bird, and had taken on a shark this year. And in her 18 years, this is the first time she's actually been injured. Luckily, we were able to just do one surgery on her, cleaned up the wounds, and she is actually off to Penguin Place, back to rehab, so she'll spend a bit of time there and she'll molt her old feathers and then she'll get released back to the wild. Yeah, you're going to Penguin Place. Hey, buddy.
Penguin Place is where these injured penguins are cared for until they're ready to be released back into the wild. It's wholly tourist funded.
Yeah, we've got 70 of these guys to get through at the moment.
The majority of our birds do come from the Dunedin Wildlife Hospital. They come in being sick, injured or starving. Disease is quite rife with these birds, unfortunately. The main one here on land being malaria, avian malaria, carried by mosquitoes. Our job here is to rehabilitate, put weight back on the birds. They usually come into us severely underweight.
There we go. I was just about to say that they're all behaving themselves today. That's not usual.
If Penguin Place wasn't here, I could almost guarantee that the population would be functionally extinct.
This is the best these birds ever look.
But the work being done to preserve these animals is now under threat.
The pandemic here has hit Penguin Place really hard, unfortunately. We are completely tourism funded, have been for the last 30 years. So we are finding it very, very difficult to feed these birds, to get medication for these birds, and to find the staff to put in the time needed, of course. In terms of our funding, we have enough to survive until June this year, which is really only months away. After that, we're not sure what we're going to do yet. We are hoping that the tourism operation starts again and we can start getting tourists back in New Zealand.
The pandemic has impacted conservation efforts across the peninsula.
So all penguin chicks are brown and fluffy when they hatch. Right, shall we see what you weigh, my sweet? You got in the bag.
Scientist HILTRUN RATZ is monitoring the little blue penguins at Pukekura.
So this chick weighs 1 kilo exactly, 1,000 grams. So that's pretty good for its age.
They're the world's smallest penguins and are especially vulnerable to predators.
The tourists are really enabling our work for the little penguins, and we have literally no international visitors, which were the majority of visitors here. It's had a huge decline in income, and without income, what do we do?
The main attraction happens at night. That's when the little blues swim ashore.
The surface of the water is sort of disturbed and ripply and things, and all of a sudden that shows up on the edge of the beach, and they'll pop up and scurry across the beach and then up the main access point, and that's when you get really close. It's amazing. It's a wonderful experience.
Back at the Penguin Hospital, it's been a tough day for Dr. Lisa and her colleagues.
We had an example of a case that actually didn't have a good outcome today, so everyone's feeling a little bit down. This little juvenile yellow-eyed penguin was brought to us yesterday. feisty bird trying to bite us, so really has a will to live. And she came in and she was unable to stand. We can't release a bird like that. We would be releasing her to a cruel, slow sort of death by starvation. So it's a hard choice. We made a really tough decision to sort of euthanize her. Luckily, as far as yellow-eyed penguins go, it's not something that we actually have to do very often. Oh, you're right there, good. I definitely feel my job is worthwhile. I'm just going to cover you so you don't hurt yourself. When I see the difference we're making, especially to hoiho, it's a species I'm so passionate about, and just being able to work with these birds and get them back into the wild, that's actually the best part of the job. Good girl.
Oh, excellent.
So we take 1.2 off that, so we'll go 6, 7, 5, 5. 5.5's perfect.
So today's a really special day for us here at Penguin Place. We have an 18-year-old female who came in 7 or so weeks ago from the Dunedin Wildlife Hospital. She's made a full recovery and is set to be released. She did have a really nasty wound across her tummy. That's completely healed and her new feathers have come through, so she is waterproof, which means she can go out and find her own food. So she'll be set to be released today.
Too easy.
Which I'm looking forward to.
It's always good. It only happens a few times a year, so to see them released fit and healthy is quite a good feeling for us. You do feel like all your hard work is paid off. We put a lot of time and effort into these chicks in particular. So seeing them going out, you do feel warm and fuzzy.
Well, that's it for this week. Coming up next week, it's the great outdoors. We're revisiting some of our favourite alfresco adventures, from Australia's Great Barrier Reef.
If you look around, you'll see the lava flow of 1983.
To the slopes of Europe's most active volcano. Don't forget, you can follow some of our recent adventures on BBC iPlayer. We're at all the usual places on social media too, and hopefully we'll be back out on the road again very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.